My name is Christian. I'm with Ckruizdesigns, a full-time graphic designer, brand consultant, anything that in the visual arts that, takes money.
So tell the people a little bit about what you do and how you got started.
To not have a long, super-winded answer, I got into graphic design through fashion, through kind of doing my own clothing line. Once that kind of fizzled out, I was like, well, the cost of this is really high, so let me go ahead and just start designing it. So then I liked it, and it came easy to me, so then I was like, oh, well, then I don't have to pay a designer to do my t-shirts. I just need to just make it myself and print. Well, then I got into the printing game, and so I was like, once I got my t-shirt press, the client that actually gave it to me, I was like, oh, now I just have everything. And then I ended up kind of working in the print industry of it. Hated it for a little bit. Everyone's on a budget, no loyalty. If there's someone who's a penny, literally pennies cheaper, they're gonna switch to someone else. So what I ended up doing was kind of liquidating all those assets, and I was like, well, why don't I just do the graphic design of it? It's more money. So once I went to art school, I kind of got into it with my professor in one of my classes. He's like, why are you here? The business of design, and you have a portfolio. And at that time was when I had really good breaks, and I was like, oh, well, this is some good money. So then I started learning anything I could, some video, animation, graphic design, web design, user interface, design. So anything I could get my hands on, research through, that's what I wanted to do.
Awesome, man. You got a lot in your background, man.
Yeah, way too much. And I can tell you it's a lot of money to even say those things, because I put a lot of overhead costs with just my programs and getting the camera, getting my computer, my laptop. And it was just one of those things. I was like, well, I want to invest into myself. That way I can have these assets. So a client is like, oh, do you do this? And I have to be, oh, I don't, but here's this person. I want to be like, no, I do that too. And just kind of package it all up. One, especially because I really kind of sympathize with small business. So that's kind of my niche, was I want to put small businesses on that same scale where they can actually look the part and then evolve with it and kind of realize, like, this is how you do it. This is how you do marketing. This is what you can afford. Here's what you can't afford. But we're not going to diminish how you look or kind of discredit your services just because you have bad, graphic design or a bad website or a bad logo or just no branding in particular. So.
Yeah, that's a great thing, man. So with all that you invested into yourself, do you think it was worth it? Is everything paying off? Is everything headed towards the direction that you envision it, or even better than what you've seen it?
They were all impulse, most of them. So when I was going through art school, I took every free asset I can. So if you're going to art school, if they have discounts, if you can, rent equipment, do so. That way you can learn it. But what I think it did pay off. Whenever I can talk to, or when I go to interviews for certain things in the creative field, since I have knowledge, I really look like an expert, and I feel like an expert because I do know. So if it's photography or editing, product photography, video, animation, or branding, it's like I've had to go through those blockades at first. And if I didn't get it with talent or trying to exercise like any knowledge I had, then I would buy to kind of help me get over that hurdle. So I think anything I purchase, or when I see that auto draft, like, oh, thanks for your payment, I'm like, oh man, I think it's definitely worth it, because it's always that client that needs it. So if I don't pay for it, then I could miss out on the job. Or let's say, hey, do you happen to have any assets for this? Or it's like, oh, I don't have them, but I want to make sure that I do have them. So even times when it's kind of struggle mode and there's bills coming up, I just make sure that those assets are completely taken care of, so that way I can make money for those. So I definitely think it's not only the investment for myself, but also for my client. And so
when you first started, when you was going to school for it and learning everything that you learned to get to where you're at now, how was you able to pay for your schooling and your materials and other items that you use right now?
I had a lot of support with friends, so I did a lot of freelance and did it for cheap. Craigslist. I would really put myself out there. So when I was working with Nordstrom, I kind of got my big clients through there. So when I started off there, I kind of learned clientele. And I believe whenever it was, especially in school, I was really doing a lot of stuff. Not if it wasn't free, then it was like assets that I would sell online. So I would make a logo, and even if it wasn't for somebody, if I made it generic or editable enough, I would sell it. And so from what at the time would seem like I'm gonna spend 3 hours on making this, kind of generic logo, I would notice when I put it up there, there'd be 8 downloads for it. And so that's a couple $100 that I was like, oh, I only had to spend this one time. So it really became like when I wasn't at school, or even when I was in class, I would be making something that I could sell. So I would make an asset, or I would make a font, or kind of mash up fonts, or make certain stock images. That way I could just sell it and then making some money for it. And I think the best thing I realized was when I was I think it was my 3rd month in art school, I actually had a teacher come up to me like, hey, what are you working on? And I thought I was in trouble. I was like, oh. She's like, no, actually, it caught my eye, and I'm actually needing that. It's gonna save me some time. So if you want, whenever you finish, buy it from me. And I was like, oh, so the school's paying me now, as opposed to that. So I really, really got into selling assets and making things and tools. That way, I could make money while I'm sleeping, or, wake up. I remember one time going to the store, Best Buy, and I was buying something. I think it was something simple. I think it was like a memory card for a camera. And I went in with like just enough for the camera and maybe, a bite to eat at Burger King on the way. And I walked out with more money than I walked in, just because it transferred through that, hey, this person liked your I think it was a watercolor. I made like watercolor icons for social media, and they got downloaded about 60 times. And I was like, oh, hey, cool. So I think when I was in school, just stumbling upon that was like how I paid for everything.
So taking advantage of like the area and the situation that you're in. I know you said when you was working in Nordstrom, you took advantage of like the clients there. And see, one thing that we're a big advocate of is no matter the situation you're in right now, because you know where you're going, you can always find something or someone that you're running into right now to either benefit or become like a clientele in the future. So keeping those relationships.
Yeah, and I don't think I ever considered myself like a starving freelancer or starving artist. I just felt like in the pursuit of how things were, it was just like there's levels to it, and I'm just at this level. So I kind of put myself as not always in the mindset of like, oh, this sucks, or I don't have money. It was always like, oh, I need to level up either my game or my marketing for myself to get those clients I wanted. So I never really felt like it was like, oh man, how am I gonna pay this? It was like, oh, here's what I need to do. I really kind of changed my mindset into problem solving. And then when you do something you love and you problem solve, it's like, oh, so now it became a behavioral thing. So once I changed my mindset to like, oh, you're not struggling, or you're not starving, or you're not having a hard time, it's like you're just at a certain level. And so all the books I could get and just read through, it was simply, how do I get to the next level? Or how do I overcome this hurdle that freelancers had? I'm young, I have a lot of time, I can get this done. So that's kind of what I did.
Yeah, that's actually one of my next questions was gonna be, how did you learn that information? But you say you went through some books, and did you watch any YouTube videos, or was your mind already kind of on that level of thinking, okay, how can I pay for this, and how can I level up?
I think it was mainly a confidence thing. Whenever I had my client pay for my silkscreen, which was like a $6,000 machine, I was like, okay, here's something I can not only use for myself, but I can print other people's stuff. So I started printing clubs and organizations. And so once I learned the print aspect of it, it really sharpened my tool for graphic design, because not many people think when they're doing a logo about colors or shape or size. But when you do it, just toning down 3 colors ends up saving that organization or that club thousands of dollars with packaging, because everything in the silk screen game is by colors. How many colors is it, 4 or 5? So I really just took what I did from each thing, and it, I guess, in a beautiful way, sharpened one tool. So when I was making logos, it wasn't like you know, here's this logo, I think it's good. It's like, here's this logo because it's cost effective. And I could go into certain meetings or go into meet with different people or jobs knowing that information. They're like, oh, you know, you're 22 and you know everything about branding, packaging. And then I got into packaging. So then when I would make things for packaging, then I was like, oh, that's another thing I can equip to my repertoire. So it's like literally every time I did a job, even though I never did it, I would execute it to the best of my ability, take that knowledge, and then bring that to the next consultation with the customer. So it's always like, I always gained something. If it wasn't knowledge, if it wasn't money, it was like, I figured out, I troubleshooted something. So I think that was the main thing, was just really having them throughout my whole career, one thing sharpened another thing. And I didn't realize it until I'd go into these meetings or go into these jobs I shouldn't have got. And then, you know, spitting out the few things I knew, but then felt confident about what I knew. And they're like, okay, you know, and then also just never really I never wore my emotions on my sleeve. So it was like, here's what I struggle at, here's what I'm not good. I mean, upfront and honest, but also like, here's what I do. And here's how I can execute what you need. And if I can't, I'll pay somebody to find to do it. And I think that's how I also learned how to be the middleman, because now I'm getting paid to tell people no because I sent it to someone else. And so they're like, hey, thank you. And that was a thing, if I couldn't do it or didn't want to, but oh no. But then I would send it to someone who I really know that can do it, or is, you know, doesn't have the financial, you know, burden I have. They'll do it for that much and they'll still give me a kickback. So it's like I turned no's or things I didn't want to do into like money. So I think that was one thing I even learned from getting jobs I wanted to get, and they're like, well, we'll pay you on internship. So they were still paying me even though I didn't get the job, but I was still working for the same company. And it was like, okay, I can use that same thing. It's like, hey, even though I'm not going to do it, I'm going to get paid for someone else to do your work. So I think that was like the big light bulb in my head of, you know, if you're already feeling like a middleman, then you can actually shift that because you found out that time and resource. So that person I found in the Philippines who's doing it for this much, who's as good as I am, will do it for this much and still give me a kickback. You know, why not? I know I went out of my way to find that guy. So never feel guilty if you have to, you know, diversify your projects. Client, there's there for a reason. It sharpens your tools, you know, for your next job.
Yeah, so kind of like being, letting them know, not being aggressive, but letting them know that you're the expert in that field, but just letting them know that, okay, I suggest this because of this, and kind of explaining to them the reason why you suggest that instead of saying, no, this will be better.
Yeah, and I think the number one thing that I always tailor into my message when I meet with a client is I always tell them, like, you're not hiring me because you're not creative or you're not inventive. You're just paying me because I'm trying to put what's in your head on paper. And so when a client says like, oh, it's missing something, and some graphic designer's like, what is it? Like, tell me, it's annoying, or maybe you don't know. It's because it's not that they're not creative, and it's not that they don't know their business. It's they just need to get what's in here onto the paper. So in graphic design or branding or identity, it's honestly just trying to figure it out. So you'll use your best judgment, and even though I have things in my portfolio that will never see the light because the client didn't want it, but that was the best rendition of it. Even though I had to water it down, I always went to the customer satisfaction side of it. It's like, what does the client want? How can I please them? And how can I do this in a fast process, especially in the world where we want things now?
Or, you know, something like that, and it just comes up. Because there's some great knowledge that you're spitting there.
I mean, I don't keep it as gospel, but it's just things that I learned. I think when you learn from experience, especially in the creative field, it embeds yourself. So it's not like at a normal job you learn something or learn how to do something on a computer or troubleshoot something. When you learn something in the creative field, especially during something you need, it stays with you. And then when you educate and teach, it's not because you're helping somebody else, like you're helping yourself out. And so there's times that I've told somebody how to do something, and then I get to the computer and I'm doing something, I'm like, ooh, I'm like, oh, I just told that person this, or hey, a little bit of that information could help me here. So I really tell people, like, even though you might not be like the expert or feel you're the expert, if you know a certain troubleshoot for something, either monetize it or really get it out there, because even if you don't monetize it, people will trust you. Like, I never, you know, even times I feel like I need to have people pay for consultation because it's an hour, you're looking at what they want. I always don't have that. I mean, I have a home phone just so I could set up things up for clients so we could talk. But when you do that, you really want to build trust, especially in the creative field. When a company has X amount of dollars, there's a lot of clients. It's kind of like a TV show. Like I always try to think of something like The Apprentice. It's like you have the same idea. There's other people that are with you, but they could also be against you. Not necessarily against you, but just competitive. And if you love sports, I always put things to sports references. So I just think it comes to the point where it's like whatever information you might feel like you're the best at, either monetize it or give it to somebody and they'll build trust. Like I've had clients hit me up 2 years after we spoke and like, oh, hey, we were looking about this and you actually told us about something we didn't think of, whether it be printing, packaging, even name stuff or website stuff. Like, oh, that little mock-up you did, we held on to it, and after the merger, this person really loved it, so we want to go with you. And I'm like, cool. Like that was a seed that I sown that I was like, oh, well, whatever, didn't happen, but then it actually came back. And I think there's been a lot of times where that's happened and it was like a big break. I think I've been blessed to be told no, but anytime I gave any information or, it just built trust. So it's like, hey, we know a guy, he spoke with us for like 3 hours. He came up with concepts and mock-ups and we held on to him. And then when we were ready to pull the trigger, he was available. And those times always end up happening almost when I need it the most. It's always like, so anytime you get told no, or hey, we're going with somebody else, or we'll think about it, you don't hear back. I mean, it could be just a setup later or a reference. I mean, when someone calls me and said, hey, so-and-so sent your thing or your work, we liked it. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even know. Like, oh, we've been following your Instagram. So I think when it comes to especially social media, like even though you might not have a lot of likes on your things, people are still following you. And those people really like what you're doing, and they'll creep, but then they'll be also quick to pull the trigger because you're one DM away.
Any major projects that you're working on now, or it doesn't really have to be anything major, anything specific that's sort of standing out right now that you can talk about? Yeah,
it's definitely the website. I didn't go to school for coding. I'd learned it, I adapted it to, but I never really, marketed my website design because when I do a website, it takes months. So I hate when you see the Wix commercial, like, oh, you can build a website for $19. Like, no, you can get it started, but for it to be effective, there's so many things that go into it. So website design, I have a consultancy company I'm doing. I have 2 makeup artists I do their websites for, and it's updating it, and not only updating it and actually doing the work, it's educating them so that way they don't have to pay me later. Or things I don't want to do. I want to empower them to get it going, but I think it's the website design is really what's been going from framework to interface to booking to making plugins specifically for a client. It's really kind of gotten to the nerdy side of things, but also how a computer interprets certain things for websites. So website has definitely been a big focus this couple months.
What about any projects that you're working on for yourself?
I think I always do a project, whether it be a logo or something. Sometimes I'll even go into what I hated, or those contest design things, but I'll go in there and I'll look at the brief and I'll kind of be fun just to sharpen that tool, and I'll win it. So I'm like, oh, this was something for an hour, it's $90. So I really gotten into that because it's like a competitive level. I want to see what new up and comers are, and if on a competitive level, I just kind of want to chin check and be like, this is where I'm at. And if I've won a few contests and I hated them. I spoke against graphic designers not doing work for free or for exposure or content. But when you do that, you actually have a portfolio. So make something that you think somebody wants when you have the downtime, and then you really change that behavior to where I'll make a logo, or I'll make a package design, or I'll do a concept, and then I'll sit on it or upload it, and then it end up being something a client really likes or wants. So I actually do it now before I start a big project, just so it feels fun and it feels like it's creative, as opposed to here you need to do X, Y, Z, here's the brief. If I do something relative to it and I do it for myself, I kind of put myself in that, you know, not emotion, but I kind of give myself excitement. So one time I had especially with the website, I had something really cool concept for my own website, and a client I actually uploaded his content to it, and then he was sold on it, and it ended up being something paid for. Like, I don't use it now and it sucks, but it really put me into what I needed to do for anything else. And I think it just comes to, I think you always need to do something, whether it doesn't have money or meaning, because one, it keeps it fun. A lot of times people don't have the luxury of having time to do something themselves, but I'll do it and I'll make that time before I start a project. So if I'll do a logo or branding, I'll actually do a logo for myself or someone else, or just even a already established company. That way I kind of get those juices flowing and it feels fun when I actually get to the project, even though it might suck.
That's great advice, man. What's been like a major challenge that you came into, and how did you overcome it?
I think the main thing is trying to go full time and feeling comfortable in it. The biggest thing is, you know, especially with creative fields, is if you don't really set your runway up and plan for it, you start struggling for money. You start getting discouraged. You start taking jobs you normally wouldn't. You start to hate your craft. So I think the biggest struggle in that regard is just really building the endurance. I think you have to build endurance. It's not a physical thing, especially in graphic design. You're sitting at a computer. Yes, it's kind of physical at times, but doing the endurance and staying up late and kind of making sure that you are giving yourself the motor skills in a way to, you know, get something done in the future. So I think it's really just building the endurance.
So, anything additional that you want to add or tell the people or let them know about you or anything in that manner?
I mean, I'm pretty much booked for everything else, so I won't book or kind of shout out or plug my services, but I will definitely say for people in the creative field, I think because of websites that I've been doing, invest into a website. Always invest into the new, you know, equipment. If it's a camera, if it's a video camera, if it's a mic, do it. Like, even if you might use it once or twice, you have it there for you later on. So I think we'll be having a few more website things I'll be posting, and also podcasts, and kind of what we're doing here, interviewing people and trying to get more information and educate people in that field, because there might be resources for it, but they're super boring. Oh, they're not relatable. You know, like, oh, here's someone who sells classical paintings, but I'm a graffiti artist. I do murals, you know, I want to get those contracts. How do I kind of find that niche when there's not much out there? So I think it's really, I think you'll see a lot of cool website stuff coming from me in different video projects and animation.
Awesome, man. Well, we definitely appreciate your time, man, and the knowledge is very extensive and helpful.
Oh, I mean, thank you guys. You guys are kind of doing what I want to do later on, which is really educate and give some exposure to people who they don't necessarily need it, but it really expedites that process, puts more eyes on it at that time, and that's probably one of the hungriest when they want to sit down and talk to people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I was gonna say you should shout your social media, but I know you said you're booked right now. So
no, I'll shout out anyway.
Contact you.
So my website's ckruiz.com. The Instagram is Ckruizdesigns. My personal one is Campaign Poppy. It's actually campaign because that's what I do full time, is conduct campaigns for different brands, and I thought it was kind of funny at the time. But Ckruizdesigns, Instagram. I mostly post memes on Facebook, so I won't give you that because it's not going to be helpful in the graphic design world, but I'll kind of give you an emotional side that you won't see from an artist and really feel like you can come to me. So, and I also have the Creative Corner podcast I'll be uploading, and that's where I'll interview certain artists and kind of get them into the freelance world to where it's really educational and actually useful. So I'll be posting all that up on YouTube, which is a Creative Corner as well, and my website.
Thank you. All right, now, well, I'll wrap it up. And again, thank you for your time, man.
Oh, thank you guys.
Look forward to seeing the future projects you do, man, and some more knowledge to share with the people.
I hope so.